What's this? Another animated film review? Why, yes indeed. I do have another animated film to talk about that came out this weekend, and it does feel good to be back reviewing films again. It's been a long time, and even if anything isn't too particularly good, I do love being back talking about it for all you happy people. Well, anyway, let's get down to business, shall we? The latest new animated film, produced by Netflix, has just dropped, and it's called The Twits, an adaptation of a Roald Dahl book that seemed to have just quietly come out, which, yeah, that seems about right for Netflix these days. They're really not that great with promoting or releasing their films. It's saying a lot when they got a bunch of big name filmmakers that have new films coming out on the platform, and yet I wouldn't know of it or if they've been released because of just how little Netflix promotes them. Which is one of many reasons why I've grown to dislike them, apart from not being able to see their films in theaters. Well, at least I did get my request at wanting to see K-pop Demon Hunters on the big screen, and it ruled, but still. It just goes to show you how much streaming has lessened the impact on feature film releasing. A new film from a big Oscar-winning director can be released on there, and you wouldn't know of it due to how it's barely talked about with marketing. So, that brings us back to this new film, which definitely looked like an odd film, and certainly not one of the year's most inspiring animated films at that. It just looked like another unimpressive animated film from Netflix Animation, who haven't exactly been winning since Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. And it's strange, because this should be a film that has a lot of merit towards it. It has a great cast, it has Phil Johnston directing it, and he's known for his work on the Wreck-It Ralph films, as well as Zootopia, which I've all liked. And it's also based on a Roald Dahl book. And Roald Dahl is one of those authors that seemingly translates exceptionally well to the big screen. A lot of fantastic films have been made based on his books, some of which are now seen as classics, like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, The Witches, Matilda, as well as animated adaptations like James and the Giant Peach and Fantastic Mr. Fox. Hell, some of them have even landed their spot at the Academy Awards. I mean, Wes Anderson recently did an adaptation of The Wonderful Story of Henry Shooker as a short, and that finally won him a long overdue Academy Award. So, yeah, it's been proven that his works are translatable to the screen. And I will say this about The Twits, it was a film that was being considered for a film adaptation for years. At one point in the early 2000s, the infamous Vanguard Animation was going to do an adaptation, and it had both John Cleese and Kirk DeMicco working on the screenplay. But eventually the film fell apart because Vanguard kept losing distribution deals with both Disney and Universal, and the film was essentially canceled. In my opinion, for the best, since, well, Vanguard Animation is pretty terrible when it comes to making films. I mean, one of them tried to use a mashup of Disco Inferno and the Monster Mash together. I love those two songs, but God, do they not go together. You might as well be putting hot sauce on a waffle. So after that madness, the rights to The Twits stayed up in the air until 2022, when Netflix acquired the entire rights to everything Roald Dahl related, and immediately fast-tracked an animated film adaptation into the works after a previous TV series version of the book was scrapped. And now, after 3 years of production, the film has finally arrived on Netflix for the world to see. And while the film didn't look anything impressive, I was more than willing to give it a chance, since I've liked plenty of Roald Dahl adaptations, and I was curious to see how a film adaptation of The Twits would work. It's certainly not one of his most iconic books, but it wasn't implausible. Unfortunately, this adaptation of the story is definitely not one that does the book justice in the slightest, nor is it a fun animated film. The Twits is awful. And no, not in the way that the characters are supposed to be. It's awful in the fact that this is such a boring and uninspiring animated film. Not only is it a dreadful adaptation of the Roald Dahl book, but it's also just an uncreative and uninteresting film that really does nothing exciting in the slightest, resulting in one of the worst animated films Netflix has produced, as well as one of the worst adaptations of Dahl's books. I knew this was going to be a story these filmmakers were going to have a hard time adapting, but man, they really blew it. This was such a nothing of a movie. The story of the film follows two horrible and nasty people known as the Twits, played by Johnny Vegas and Margot Martindale. The couple hate each other and everything around them, but are striving to open up a theme park called Twitlandia in the city of Triprot, which takes place in the tri-state area. Wait, the tri-state area? I thought the main villain of that was this crazy pharmacist who was in this strange building that somehow has a jingle. Doofenshmirtz Incorporated! Heh. The joke was staring at me in the face. I couldn't resist. Well, anyway, back to the story. When their plans to open the park go awry, they vow revenge on the city and cause mayhem. Meanwhile, two orphan children named Bisha, played by Maitreyi Ramakrishnan, and Bubsy, played by Ryan Lopez, decide to investigate the situation involving the Twits, which leads them to finding a group of monkey-like creatures they captured called the Mugglewumps, played by Timothy Simon and Natalie Portman. The children free the Mugglewumps and take them back to their orphanage, only for the Twits to vow to get them back to open their park. And so, the orphans have to figure out how to keep the Mugglewumps safe against the Twits as they try to figure out their own dastardly ways on getting them back. Now, whenever I talk about book-to-film adaptations, I usually don't compare the book to the film, since the two are completely different mediums and have their own pros and cons. Plus, it has been proven that even if a film strays away from the book, it can still create a rather fun film experience even if it stays true to the themes. How to Train Your Dragon comes to mind. That being said, I am going to talk about the book when talking about this film because this is one of those films that really fails to understand what it's adapting. Plus, I actually have read the book, so I know what I was getting into with this film. And I'll just start off by saying that this is a book that is rather hard to adapt. The Twits is a rather short book, and it's also one that doesn't really have a concrete narrative. It's very rambly as it starts off by talking about who the Twits are before it segues into various pranks they pull on each other before it moves to the Mugglewumps, a group of monkeys that the Twits hold captive who are able to free themselves from their prison with the help of birds, while also helping teach the Twits a lesson. It's a book on the surface that could seem really tricky to adapt, but one that's not impossible. And for what it's worth, I do think the filmmakers do add a bit of creativity when trying to adapt it to a film. The most notable thing the film adds is having the Twits trying to mobilize the town to support them by lying and making false promises, and the people, acting like sheep, fall for their lies and give them support, which includes them running for mayor. I think that's a clever idea and something that would ring true to the spirit of the book. And it's one idea that does enhance the message about defeating hatred. It's a real good idea. However, the major storyline the film adds involving the orphans was anything but a good idea because, I really dislike the plot the filmmakers gave this story because it is one of the most boring, uninteresting, uncreative, and flat-out lazy stories I've heard in an animated film all year. And it's one I really don't understand how they thought it would work. As soon as these boring orphans show up, the film instantly slams to a halt because it really goes down the most tiresome and boring beats you could get from a film like this. Most of the film is just the kids refusing to give the Mugglewumps up to the Twits, and whenever the Twits try to find one way to get them, these orphans outsmart them and rinse and repeat. This goes on forever, and it is just frustrating. The film just constantly goes around in circles with this idea, and it never seems like it wants to evolve or bring anything new to the table, which makes it even more frustrating. And when it does pull elements from the books, it doesn't do anything with it. One notable instance is the pranks the two Twits pull on each other, which includes Mrs. Twit serving her husband worms instead of spaghetti. You'd think that the film could do something interesting with the numerous pranks they pull on one another, and how their hatred of each other results in their downfall. But no, it doesn't do anything with it. Hell, when the film does show the spaghetti prank, it's only there for a lame gross-out gag. And that was just cheap. And the whole thing with the Twits needing the Mugglewumps back is kind of pathetic and also a bit convoluted. In the book, they were just regular circus monkeys who wanted to escape and go back to Africa, and that was rather simple enough. So, you think with this film, they would have these monkeys just there for entertainment as part of the theme park, right? Actually, no, it's a lot more complicated than that. The Mugglewumps are actually these magical creatures from Loompa Land. Yeah, they threw Loompa Land from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory into this film. I don't know why. Are they trying to make a Roald Dahl cinematic universe? I mean, making a cinematic universe in 2025 just seems kind of ridiculous. Ugh, I don't know. Anyway, as I was saying, these are magical creatures from Loompa Land whom essentially help power the theme park because the tears they shed when they're upside down are magical tears that generate energy. Yeah, I just... why? What's the purpose of this? Why do the Mugglewumps need to be magical and cry these precious tears? Is there really a point to this other than it being a MacGuffin for the Twits? I don't get it. They could have just had the Mugglewumps as regular monkeys that are the Twits' prized possession for generating revenue in the park, and it would have been more than fine. Like, imagine if in James and the Giant Peach, Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker wanted the peach back not because it was massive and would make them lots of money, but because it was a ridiculous fountain of youth that could generate eternal beauty. Yeah, it sounds ridiculous, right? It makes no freaking sense. That's how I felt with the Mugglewumps in this film. There was no point to this ridiculous change. And it's a shame, because I kind of liked the Mugglewumps here. They were funny and sweet. Also, Natalie Portman was certainly trying her best with the terrible script. I really wish the film had the Mugglewumps, the protagonists, like they were in the book, because they are certainly much more interesting characters than these boring orphans. But I'll get to them in a bit. As for some of the other characters, there's really not much to say about the townspeople, though the Twits themselves are kind of fun with how antagonistic they are. Johnny Vegas was having a lot of fun as Mr. Twit, and I do think they do some dastardly stuff throughout. It's just a shame that the protagonists they have to face are as dull as stale bread. If I had to pinpoint the Achilles heel of the film, these two orphans are easily the problem, because boy, are these characters so uninteresting and dull. These are two of the most empty, lifeless, and absolutely uninteresting child characters I've seen in an animated film this entire decade. There is nothing about them that is interesting in the slightest, except for their generic goals, with Bisha wanting to reunite with her long-lost parents and Bubsy wanting to be adopted. That's it. Otherwise, these characters are about as empty as a drum. Actually, I take that back. At least drums can make cool sounds and have purpose. These orphans have nothing to offer. There was no point in adding them to this story whatsoever. Why were they even added? It genuinely makes no sense. And it really angers me because I think children characters deserve to be better written than this. Children shouldn't be written as these innocent, goody two-shoes characters. They're imperfect, but they have tons of personality and are striving to have joy as they discover themselves and try to figure out who they are. It's why I love a lot of stories that takes place from a child or teenager's point of view. And it makes this film all the more frustrating because these are children I just can't see anyone relating to because they are that empty. And not just that, it feels like such a ridiculous addition to this story. And it's weird because one of the film's writers, Meg LaFave, has also adapted a children's book loosely into an animated film. But My Father's Dragon worked because it really understood what to pull from the book by turning it into a wonderful story about friendship and overcoming fears, while also having plenty of imagination to boot. And this film is really lacking in that. Not to mention humor. The film really does lean into a lot of lowbrow humor, and while Dahl was known to sneak that into his books, it was mostly sparingly, and when he used it, it was rather funny. This film really overdoes it, and some of the gags are just run into the ground.
Let me show you my diarrhea. Diorama.
Yeah, having to hear this joke over 10 times in this film, it gets old quick. I should also say that the animation in this movie is also a mixed bag. I'll give it credit for looking distinct and wanting to be somewhat off-putting, which I think matches the tone of the book. Plus, I do love the production design with how weird and odd it looks. Though, I do think the film might have gone a bit overboard with its color palette and character designs. The film uses a lot of browns and yellows that it just kind of looks a little too gross for my tastes. And another thing that the film wastes that was really disappointing. Ugh, man, I can't believe this film wasted it. There are songs in the film that are written by David Byrne. Yes, that David Byrne. And sad to say, this isn't him at his best. It seems like the film just doesn't know how to use his songs properly, and while his melodies are as quirky and interesting as ever, the lyrics are nothing to write home about. It's a massive shame, because I love the Talking Heads, but these songs are really nothing special. Oh well. At least a much better animated film from this year got to make better use of David Byrne. So, yeah, I really don't know what else I can add about this. The Twits is a really, really bad movie. This is everything that a Roald Dahl adaptation should not be. Despite a couple of interesting ideas, the changes to the story are pointless and add up to nothing. The animation is a mixed bag despite some interesting production design, and the film also suffers due to its boring and uncreative main characters. This is easily one of the worst animated films to come out this year, and it's not really worth watching, especially if you're a Dahl fan and have read this book. If anything, just stick with the book, or hell, even other Roald Dahl movies. This is one that is not going to be as fondly remembered as Willy Wonka, Matilda, or Fantastic Mr. Fox. So with that, I'm giving the Twits a 4. This film was, well, for the lack of a better term, such a twit. In a time where we have gotten some fantastic Roald Dahl adaptations, this is not one of them that really does not live up to the greats. Nor does it live up to being a good animated film in Netflix's catalog. Maybe one day we'll get a more proper adaptation of the story, because the film we're stuck with now is about as appealing as a Snozzberry.